today's masterclass all about how to take control of your IBS when traveling. So today we're going to go through some very, very practical advice because I do feel sometimes as health professionals like myself, and I'll introduce myself properly shortly, we're very guilty at talking about the science sometimes, which is lovely, but I want to do the science and also how we can apply it so we can have a really good time traveling this summer and beyond. So we'll go through little tips and structure, and then at the end we are going to go through a Q&A. So if you guys are like me, forget things 5 seconds after you learn them, write things down if you've got questions, and we will come to them at the end of today. Right, I'm just going to move, I've got a little video box there in the middle of where I'm going to be reading. So as an introduction, we're going to just go through the sponsor welcome, which is kindly FODZYME, who are sponsoring this presentation today, and just about what they do and things like that shortly before we get into everything. Why we get symptoms when we travel, because definitely with IBS in general, but especially when we travel, we need to understand why these things happen, because once we understand them, guess what? We can then resolve them, prevent them, things like that. How to apply my take control factors, which we'll come to travel to avoid symptoms, planning travel, eating out on holiday, and the ultimate travel toolkit. So I'm just going to go through who I am, because some of you will know me from Instagram as the IBS dietitian or Kirsten Jackson, an IBS specialist, but some of you might be actually maybe new to that or maybe coming from a different place today. So I think it's very important to know who's giving you this advice as such. So I'm a UK consultant IBS dietitian. So I do have a dietetics degree from Hertfordshire University in the UK, which is like the minimum entry level, I guess, to be a dietitian. You have to have that degree. I've got a postgraduate certification in Advanced Dietetics in Nottingham University. I support the British Dietetic Association as a media spokesperson, so you might see me in some newspapers, things like this. Doesn't make me qualified, but it maybe explains where you might have seen me before. And also I am a person with IBS, which it doesn't make me qualified to give you guys advice today, but I do think it's really nice to know that I'm not just another health professional. I do actually understand how it feels when these things don't work, or how it feels to actually push yourself to do something that you don't feel comfortable with. I get it. I've been there. So slightly different angle maybe than what you're used to perhaps. I own the food treatment clinic, which is an online clinic for people with IBS. That's all we do is IBS all day long. And I will be soon to be a published author with Bloomsbury Publishing. So I am writing a book all about IBS just to make it more accessible for more people. And that'll be out next year. Okay, so I will hand it over to FODZYME first of all, before we get into the mix of this all, just to explain, what the company is about and how, they help people as such with their products.
Thank you, Kirsten. Hi, everyone. I'm Jocelyn. I'm a registered dietitian here with FODZYME. I'm also focused on GI nutrition and lead our partnerships here, and we're so excited to have Kirsten today as a partner and be able to share her wealth of knowledge with you all. I know you're going to find it so helpful. I also want to share a little bit about FODZYME and the company behind FODZYME, Kiwi Biosciences. Our founders are Angie Liu and David Hackwell. Angie is an IBS patient herself and went through that typical patient journey of being recommended a low FODMAP diet, finding that it does help with symptom control, but really from a gastronomical and social perspective, it is so limiting. So she partnered with David, and through a lot of intense research and development, FODZYME was created. And our mission here is really to make the FODMAP approach easy, sustainable, and effective for everyone. So we're working on much more R&D and other products that we'll be excited to share with you in the months and years ahead. But we can go on to the next slide, and I'll tell you all a little bit about FODZYME if we are new to some of you out there. So FODZYME is digestive enzymes. It breaks down the FODMAP groups, GLS, lactose, and fructan. And so the way it's used is you sprinkle FODZYME on your FODMAP containing meal. And this means that those FODMAPs, instead of kind of accumulating in the digestive tract where we know that they can cause gut distress, they get broken down and are in a more easily absorbed and digestible form. So, FODZYME can be used when traveling, when dining out, like we'll talk about today, as well as, day to day, so that you can start cooking with garlic, onion, wheat, asparagus, all these delicious high FODMAP foods that maybe have been off your plate for a while. You can start reintroducing them and enjoying family meals again together. So we're happy to share more about FODZYME following today's session, but for now, I'll turn it back to Kirsten and let her cover our content.
Great, thank you so much. And I have to say, guys, I was just saying this before we started the presentation today, it's so nice to actually partner with a brand with really good ethics, because you've no idea how many people contact me offering to do collaborations, and honestly, their products are just awful. And it can be really confusing when you've got an awful condition, what to trust and not to trust. So that's been a nice kind of collaboration from that perspective. So cool, let's get into now traveling with IBS and what we can do. So who gets symptoms when they travel? I think most people with IBS, and I was going to have a bit of a chat with this as well, but maybe we can talk about it at the end. But I think most people with IBS will. And I actually recently did a survey on my Instagram about this, and it was literally like 30,000 people said yes, compared to like 2 people who said no. And I find that quite ironic, because normally when we travel, it's seen as, a positive experience. Yes, there can be stressful elements for everybody, but it should be, having maybe some free time, or going to relax, or spending time with loved ones, or even in a work sense, often travel can be exciting. We're going to maybe a new country or a new place in the world. And unfortunately with IBS, we don't really get that element. So when we go on holiday, we should be getting these things: excited about going away, right? Enjoying wearing new clothes, loving the new local cuisine. You can't wait to try that French food, or somewhere in Europe are so many places we Brits go to normally, or even Asia or anywhere else in the world. You're really looking forward to that food as part of travel. Energized to see all the new sights, planning what films you'll watch on the plane, depending on how far you're going, of course. But in reality, what we actually get when we have IBS is anxious leading up to the holiday. So we're not looking forward to it, thinking about, what's going to happen, not happen, how we're going to let ourselves down, or our loved ones who you feel are having to deal with this, for you. You feel very guilty about that. Worried about using or making it to the public toilets. Stressed about which foods will actually be available, especially when we're away. We don't even know what's available or not available sometimes. It's that lack of control. Upset about how our body looks, a really poor body image. That's a really common issue, and a question we actually got asked about before this talk tonight. I'm just going to move the chat box down a bit. And tired and unable to enjoy our time, which is, the opposite of what we're actually wanting to do, which is the irony of it. So today, we are going to be talking about the Take Control IBS principles. Now, these are the 4 principles that I use to help my clients, thousands of people, to sort out their IBS. We're not, curing it. I'm not going to tell you that you can cure. Unfortunately, we know at the minute that that's not a thing. What we can do is we can manage it and make it work for us, and really learn to understand it. And that comes from looking at these 4 principles of mental health, movement, sleep, and nutrition. And this is why maybe if you've ever tried, just therapy before, or just the low FODMAP diet before, that you might have seen some, results, but you're not going to see really big, significant changes, because IBS is very multifactorial. So we do need to consider these 4 factors. And today I'm going to show how you can consider these 4 factors, but in terms of traveling, and why travel itself doesn't disrupt our gut, but it's the things that we almost get out of sync with, and having a sensitive gut, it just, amalgamates with that. So understanding the Take Control principles and what they mean, again, all about understanding, then we can apply our understanding to our own situation. So first of all, we have mental health, and this is very much with the gut-brain axis. So most of you might, I say most of you, I'm assuming this, some people do know this, some people don't, but your gut and your brain are connected through something called the gut-brain axis, which is the brain talks to the gut, but also the gut can speak to your brain in what we call bidirectional communication, because it's going back and forth. So that often means that things like stress, anxiety that you feel will impact your gut in a number of ways, but equally, your gut can also impact your mental health, and it ends up in this cycle. So we used to think back in the day, oh, only people who have depression get IBS or anxiety, but actually now we're starting to realize sometimes things can start in the gut, and actually that then impacts your mental health. So some people's anxiety, quite rightly so, might actually come from having uncontrolled IBS. But then that's escalating and then causing IBS symptoms. And it's this bidirectional communication. So that's why mental health is so important to consider and tackle. Okay, and by doing that, we can reduce IBS symptoms, even prevent them from occurring at times, depending on the type and the severity. This is a fight or flight response. So part of this bidirectional pathway, the problem is we have this fight or flight response. So when your body comes under threat, this fight or flight response makes changes to help you fight or flight that threat. And I'll explain what this means, because a lot of people use this terminology, you know, it's a fight or flight response. You might have heard about it, but we're not really sure what it means. So changes that include, so if your body thinks it's under stress, you know you're about to get attacked, or you need to run away or fight something, what you might notice is someone's pupils dilating to really focus on that threat. The heart rate is increasing, pooing really quickly or releasing that stool. We're not sure why, but the theory is that you weigh less. That's the theory with it. Okay, so this pathway is really useful if you're actually being attacked. Great, because you need that, you know, adrenaline pumping. You need to be able to fight something or really run away quickly. So this is a very useful inbuilt system in us. But the problem is, often when this is triggered, your body is reading different things as a threat. So, you know, things like financial problems will then cause you to feel stress, and then this fight or flight response gets triggered, and it can cause these digestive problems, unfortunately, to happen as a result of that. Now, if we can consider that as a whole of IBS, but when you start to think about it as leading up to your holiday, what are you doing? So with work, even though you might have annual leave for maybe a week, 2 weeks, often no one's doing your job during that time. So you often have to cram those 2 weeks off into other times to get more project work done or whatever you're doing. So you're actually working longer or working more stressfully. Last minute errands. I don't know about anyone else, but even me, I'm guilty of thinking, you know what, I'll just get those last minute things the day before holiday. And actually there's a lot more to get done than you realize. More stress. You're feeding into this pathway. Feeling very anxious about your IBS can be one, of course. And again, that's going to feed into this pathway. And all of these elements in themselves might then trigger this fight or flight response, because your body's saying, I'm threatened. I need to make changes to survival, but this is triggering you all week, like dripping in. And guess what? This is going to cause IBS symptoms. So I'm not just telling you this to be interesting. We're going to obviously think about ways we can reduce this down, but you need to be aware of this, because often when we talk about stress, you might think, oh, actually, this week is fine because these are just little things. But when we have IBS, we're actually much more sensitive to finding this pathway. So these little things will build up in a very sensitive gut, which is what we have when we have IBS. And we also know that things like chronic stress can worsen sleep and also increase pain signaling. So if anyone suffers with IBS pain specifically, actually just that trickling in all the time can increase how your brain reads the pain, even if there's nothing different happening in your actual gut. So it's something to really consider. And of course, it can worsen sleep, and we'll come to how sleep will impact your gut in 2 seconds. And this is all sort of, you know, circling in and affecting each other. The next one is movement. So the reason why I use movement, by the way, rather than exercise, is because I feel definitely my generation and other generations, we've been taught exercise. It's this like, you know, CrossFit must be like 6-pack, muscular, high intensity, or it doesn't count. And yes, that's great for some people. I'm not putting that down. It's actually fantastic. But actually, movement of any sort is very good for your body. So I don't want to detract from that. And actually, for some people, high intensity exercise isn't good. So any form of movement is really good for your IBS. And research shows that 3.2 to 5.2, very specific from research, hours per week helps improve IBS symptoms. That's not to say less than this doesn't or more than it doesn't. It's just that that research was shown on that amount. So we know that movement in general is very, very good for our gut health. Okay. And likely mechanism is multifactorial. So it's going to improve our mental health. We've already discovered how our mental health will actually help with our gut health. So we can improve the mental health by moving more. That's going to feed into that. That's going to feed into gut health. Better sleep can help with constipation. So if anyone is more IBS-C dominant, actually moving in general can help with this, and linked to improvements in the microbiome as well over long term. And I'm going to go through a case study in a minute to show you how some of these factors just don't happen in travel. The next one is sleep. So poor sleep is linked to poorer IBS symptom control directly. So that means there's actually research showing the number of wakings that you have in a night is directly linked to more days per week that you actually have symptoms directly linked. And yet everyone was so worried about taking this out of their diet, taking that out of their diet. Something like even going to bed a little bit earlier, having earplugs in can make a huge difference. Poor quality sleep means both the quantity and the quality. So we all probably know we should go to bed a bit earlier or have 8 hours sleep, this golden amount, but actually the quality of sleep, like how deep cycles are, and not having that disturbed sleep is really, really important. The average person needs 7 to 9 hours per night. So just consider that. Some people, most of my clients are around 6.5, 6 hours. Over the week, they're losing at least 1 hour, one night's sleep every single week. So that's really quite significant when you look at that. Likely mechanisms in terms of how sleep impacts gut health are multifactorial. And there you can see there's a nice diagram with the sleep cycles. And what that means is that you should be getting all of these cycles each night. So if you're maybe, getting disturbed at some point, you might start to go to sleep. You wake up a little bit, you don't even notice, and then you start the cycle again, and then all you're getting is this very light sleep all night. So you wake up thinking, I've had 8 hours sleep a night, why do I feel so tired? The quality of the sleep is really, really important as well. So you can go through, if you see on that diagram, there's different stages, you need to keep going round and round that circle all night. So disturbed sleep is a huge issue. And then the last one is nutrition. So nutrition, I could probably do 7 or 8 masterclasses on nutrition and IBS alone. So we're going to keep it very specific, and we'll go for it in a second to travel. But everything we eat impacts the gut in some way, good, bad, and every single bit. Generally speaking, I have to say there is no one food, unless you've got an allergy or you've got celiac, that's bad for gut health. It's about the overall diet, but everything will have like a little bit of an effect as such. The core elements in IBS are fiber. I cannot tell you how much, whether you've got IBS-C, IBS-D, having adequate amounts of fiber is absolutely fundamental to gut function, because we need fiber to form bulky, soft poos. And if you don't have that enough, your body is going to become constipated. If you have looser stools, there's nothing there to form a stool, and it just goes through you. So fiber is very important regardless of what type of IBS you have. Adequate amounts of calories. Again, the amount of times I see someone on around 1,200 calories per day, which seems to be apparently okay for some online, weight loss, fat loss gurus. And actually the research shows that if you're having, especially as a woman, less than about 1,800 calories, that you will become very constipated. So just really consider that. And in men, it's much higher. So the average woman should be having at least 2,000, and in men, 2,500. So you might need even more than that if you're particularly active. FODMAPs, again, so FODMAPs are really important. And just as a reminder for anyone who is joining the webinar tonight who doesn't know what FODMAPs are fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. If you have just zoned out to that science lesson already, they're basically just different types of carbs, go into your gut, they end up in the large bowel undigested, and they draw in lots of water, cause a lot of gas. So in all people with IBS, it will cause a lot of bloating, gassy symptoms. Some people will get looser stools as well. So these can impact people. And the problem is everybody has a different tolerance to them. And sometimes your mental health, your sleep can impact your tolerance as well. So it's quite a confusing kind of subject. And then finally, fluid intake. So these are probably the core elements in nutrition around symptom control. There's other kind of fancy things we can start adding in, like supplements or probiotics, all this kind of thing. But generally speaking, that's going to give you marginal gains, and that's kind of longer term. These are the core fundamentals when it comes to real symptom control and things that you need to consider when you're traveling. So how to apply these principles to travel? So I'm going to give you Anna's story, and I'm sure some of you will relate, and just keep thinking of 4 principles that we need for IBS health. So what was it? Movement, sleep, mental health, and nutrition. Okay. So Anna has relatively well-controlled IBS. So we're going from a positive starting point here. But this week she's going on holiday. Anna has a very busy job and works late each night for a week leading up to the trip so she can get more work done and cover her time off. She is out of her usual routine this week and doesn't do any movement as she doesn't have time for it. Anna has limited time to get those last minute bits done and starts to become more stressed to get packed on time. Her flight goes at 7 a.m, which means she needs to leave her house at 3 a.m. time to get there. So as you can start to see, some of these elements are really coming in, that she's not going to get the sleep. She's not getting any movement suddenly. She's maybe not getting enough sleep even through the week either. The stress triggers in there as well. It continues. So Anna becomes dehydrated on the flight. We all know when you go through security, you can't take your reusable water bottles. You actually can, but most people don't know that. You get rid of your water. You've got like one cup every so often if the air hostess gives you any water on the flight. So it becomes dehydrated on the flight. She is anxious about having to use the toilet on the plane due to everyone waiting outside and also the smell. So she decides to hold it in until she gets to the hotel. And this can actually worsen constipation as well. You need to really honor those bowels. She eats a low fiber breakfast on the plane. Plane food is not always the best at all. And a quick sandwich at the airport when she arrives. So again, low fiber foods. And although her symptoms do improve a little, she remains quite bloated due to having no control over a FODMAP intake on her. That should be on her holiday. So when she starts on the holiday, symptoms improve a little bit as she, starts to move around a bit more. But actually, the first few days, not great at all. And Anna spends the first 4 days with stomach cramps, bloating, and constipation, which is a really, really common issue. And I know people on this webinar, Masterclass, they will be saying they have loose stools as well, but definitely constipation in the first few days of a holiday is really, really common, because maybe it's not the actual travel getting on the plane, but it's all these factors leading up to it that we've done, we haven't really realized. And that's why our gut's saying, actually, it's a bit too sensitive. So question for you guys now, can you start to relate to some of this story? And I'm sure you can, because I've got this story from working with thousands of people like you. So I know it because all of my clients go through it. And they, at first I'm like, because every time I travel, I'll never be able to go on holiday again. I'm like, hold on, you guys are not a medical anomaly. You are, science, there's thousands of studies on this. Let's have a look back at your diary. And when you look at that week leading up to it, these problems are all there. So of course our gut is going to end up like this. But we don't want to just go, oh, okay, now I understand it. We need to prevent this from happening. And now I'm going to show you how to do that, and also ways to resolve symptoms if they are there, rather than just going, oh, I should have done that. Once they're there, what can we do about it as well? So apply the take control principles to the difficulties of traveling. So it's not going to be easy because you're out of your normal routine, right? So how long before travel do you think we need to prepare your gut for this onslaught? Day before, the week? Let's have a look. Okay. So for mental health, to start with this, we need to be really, really looking at about a week, if not 2 weeks before you are starting to travel, to really plan these trips in. So you might be someone watching this masterclass who is somebody who does once a year holiday, and you can actually plan well in advance. You might be somebody who travels a lot for work, even within the US, for example. And actually maybe you need just to have a protocol, a travel protocol that you can just go to, and is there in place because it is so frequent. So consider that. So much in advance than most people think. So first of all, what are your stress triggers leading up to your travel? And the only way to really look at this is if you are someone that keeps a diary, that will be really useful. Or alternatively, what you can do is just have a reflection, have a minute down, jot some ideas, think about last time you traveled, what are your stress triggers? Because I mentioned things like the work, but actually everyone's got their own stress triggers, and it's very personal to that person. Unless you really understand it, you're not going to be able to improve that at all. How can you reduce the impact of these is what I would say. And there's different ways, and there's no one size fits all approach. So can you take an extra day of annual leave before you travel to get things done? Now, most of us want to maximize our holiday away. So some people even will go travel overnight, so they get to their destination in the morning, so they're their first day of annual leave. And I would probably recommend against this, because actually it means you're finishing work at 7 p.m, rush straight to the airport. And what's the point if the first few days of your holiday, actually, you're going to be really uncomfortable? So sounds strange, but you want to have a nice time off. Have an extra day, use one of those annual leave to extend that. Can you be more realistic about workload? So look at what's going on in the schedule. Is there anything that you can delegate, take off that doesn't need to be done? Is there those perfectionism tendencies that are coming in, which I do see often with my clients? I don't know if it's partly why we get IBS, I'm not sure. But definitely just put your to-do list down and think, is there anything actually it just doesn't need to be done? And consider daily meditation routine or booking in a massage. Now, this doesn't reduce the triggers coming in, but what it does do is reduce the impact that those triggers will have on your body. So we know that this is going to be a high stress period, higher than what you're normally going to be, used to. So why not start with doing 10 minutes? Or if you're already doing 10 minutes, increase it up to 20 minutes per day of meditation, things like Calm App, Headspace, to really counteract that increased stress load. Booking in a massage. If you're in a financial situation, something like a massage, you might not even think about normally, or think about it as a holiday thing. But actually, why not have it when you're going to go through a more stressful period? You're really increasing that relaxation zone. There's other examples, if there's things like you love reading, anything that helps you really relax, you need to plan it in almost like it's an appointment leading up to that week. And if you have specific fears, I would say having an accident, for example, so leaking stool, which has happened to quite a few people, speak to a CBT therapist, so cognitive behavioral therapist, who is trained specifically in IBS, because they can help you with that fear. So often, we might sit there with fears and think, even if it's never happened before, we're like, no, it won't happen. Don't be silly. Like, we're talking to ourselves, but we don't feel like that. And we can't trick ourselves into feeling a different way. But actually, therapy around very specific scenarios is a really good route, especially in IBS. So movement is the next one. So how can we plan for this? First one is be consistent. So you'll notice with my example of Anna, like, she just prioritize work, so she wasn't doing anything. It needs to be consistent. So modify what you have. So if you're normally someone that goes to the gym or goes to very specific classes, just, again, reduce that perfectionism tendency and think, actually, I don't have time for, 30-minute travel to the gym, 1 hour at the gym, 30 minutes back, that's 2-hour round trip. Why not, at your lunch break, just prioritize a 30-minute walk every day that week, because you need the increase and reduction of your stress impact. And also, that when you sit on that flight, you're not going to be moving very much. So that week, you have to do a minimum 30 minutes. Doesn't really matter what it is, even if you've got a towel or a mat down on the floor and you're doing some stretching and some lightweight yoga, but you need that consistency. Walk around the airport for 30 minutes. Sounds strange, but honestly, the problem when you go flying is we're just sitting down for so long, or even in a car, we're sitting down for so long. So even in that routine of travel, if there's 30 minutes you can schedule in, even if that means getting to an airport earlier or going for a walk before you head off in your car journey, that can make a huge difference to your day. And then just going to move thing, plan it into your travel from day one. So I think, a lot of my clients I speak to, they do like to be active on holiday, but some of us, we are very guilty. The first day you get there, you're really tired, don't want to move. Maybe you're really stressed from work. You just want to lay at the beach or the pool or whatever you're doing. Try and get movement in there as soon as you get there. And especially And I'll come to this in a minute with jet lag when we cover it, early in the morning, because that's a really good time to tell your body, your circadian rhythm, it's daytime, let's get going. But that's going to really, really help your body. So again, it doesn't have to be crazy. You don't have to join, the acro aerobics that they've got on in the hotel. It could be something simple as just, stretching out 30 minutes, watching a bit of Netflix. But you need to plan that in and be consistent again. Okay, and then sleep. So aim for 7 to 9 hours of sleep per 24 hours period while traveling. So this might sound a bit strange, but we've got to do what we can with what we've got. So if you are like Anna and you have to go at 3 a.m. for this flight, when you're on the flight, you need to sleep for a few hours. And then when you get to your destination, try to get to an early night so that within 24 hours, you're still getting that 7 to 9 hours sleep. Or it could be actually that you get somewhere really early, in which case go for a nap, not after midday, because that will impact your sleep that night, but a nap in the morning to top yourself up. And really then in the next day, if you're not quite getting it on that first day, the next day when you're in your destination, prioritize an early night over going out for a lovely dinner somewhere in the new, resort, wherever you are, because that might sound really appealing, but actually if you just get your body back on track a little bit quicker, it will make a huge difference to your enjoyment and what you get out of the holiday. Plan an early night. Avoid alcohol. So alcohol, I was recently traveling to the UK, maybe it's us Brits, I don't know, from the UAE, and the flight was 7 in the morning and they were pouring out champagne on the flight, and I just couldn't believe it, and people were stood around the bar. So alcohol is the biggest issue, I feel like, definitely in the Western society when it comes to a lot of health, but definitely in gut health. So alcohol itself, it does make you feel relaxed, of course, but alcohol is a drug. And it is a depressant. That's the name of the drug, because it depresses our nervous system, makes us feel relaxed, sleepy, but actually it disrupts the sleep cycle. And it can also impact your gut at any level. So I know there's various across the world, different safe amounts, but these are generally looking at what the average amount of alcohol intake is, and trying to give the public some sort of thing to, aim for. So it's a very general, it's not aimed at people with IBS, and it's definitely not a safe amount. There is no safe amount of alcohol we know about. So I'd really avoid alcohol in those first couple of days to reduce any kind of symptom impact on your gut health. I know that sounds super mean, but really you got to think, is it really worth it? Or do I want to feel like absolutely, energized, thriving in this holiday? Or do I want that 1 glass of wine, 2 glasses of wine on the flight? Not worth it. Avoid caffeine. So caffeine itself has got a 10-hour lifespan in the body, very average. Some people it's less, some people it's more. But that shocks people, because if you think about it, if you're having even a coffee midday and you'll go to bed at 10, it's just about out of your system at that point. So definitely it's got a very long lifespan. And if you're trying to top up your sleep with naps, things like that, it's just not worth it. So to keep caffeine early morning if you're going to have it. And the other thing to consider is if you are suffering with anxiety, which can of course fluctuate, sometimes it's worse, sometimes it's better, caffeine can make this worse. So definitely with myself, I get anxiety, which I think is really common in IBS. And there's times where if my anxiety is particularly bad, I will skip caffeine. Of course, you can have decaf coffee, yeah, although decaf caffeine, but decaf coffee. But actually, if we're having regular caffeine, that's going to make that anxiety worse. And guess what happens? Anxiety is worse. It's going to trigger that gut-brain axis. You're going to have symptoms. So again, sounds mean, but is it really worth it? Get into the local time zone if this is different. So there's a couple of ways to do this. You could actually get into the local time zone ahead of time. So you could consider, the couple of weeks before, again, thinking really preventively here, starting to slowly change your body clock to that. If you don't have young children like me that get up at 6 a.m. anyway, you can get that some sort of control that could be hugely beneficial. But when you're there, try to eat at the local times, because that will help set your body clock. Interestingly, it helps circadian rhythms, which is like your internal body clock. Try to get out in the morning in the daylight. So first thing in the morning, even if you're going somewhere that's cold when you're watching this, maybe going somewhere for winter, as soon as the daylight's out, if you can get out in the daylight, even if you're really tired and plan on going back for a nap later on, fine, but that will help to really reset your body clock and get back to the usual time. And then trick your circadian rhythm. So sometimes you need to trick your circadian rhythm at times, and that means circadian rhythm is these internal body clocks, making sure that it's dark when you sleep, quiet, slightly colder. All these things will indicate to these internal body clocks that it's time for sleep. And again, thinking about the quality, then that's going to improve the quality of sleep. It's so important for IBS. So if you are somewhere, please keep the AC on to keep at that really low, cool temperature. It should feel like a little bit too cold, and then you get into bed and you get all snuggled, that's fine, but it should be colder. If they haven't got blackout blinds, and if you're not sure, take a sleep mask, again, tricking your body into saying it's nighttime now. So really consider these little tips. Again, it's nothing one major thing, it's all these little things that are going to really add up to a huge difference in gut health. So busting jet lag. So jet lag, for anyone who doesn't know, because we typically use jet lag a lot. Sometimes people use jet lag when they're talking about just being tired from travel. Actually, though, it's actually a more specific term. Jet lag happens when you travel between 2 or more time zones. So your internal clock is set to one time zone, but you're actually in a different time zone. And this can be very difficult going on holiday the first few days, but also when you come back, again, trying to reset your body for that. And that can really disrupt the gut, because we know that sleep is really, is directly related to gut health. So other people, they can just struggle, they get over it, they might be really tired at work or really awake in the morning, depending on their time zone, but they generally get over it over a few days, depending on, their age and things like that. But when you've got IBS, it should be like IBS rather than BS, we need to have be a bit kinder to our bodies, because likelihood is if you've got jet lag, which is disrupting your sleep, that's also going to disrupt your mental health. And all of this is going to accumulate to cause your gut to be more sensitive. So it doesn't mean that you can't bust jet lag, but we probably need to be a bit more thoughtful about this process, rather than just going, oh, it's going to be a bit difficult when we get home or on holiday. Don't accept that. Really start to bust it a little bit. So already mentioned starting moving into the new time zone before you go on holiday, but also before you come back. If you are someone that also travels for, just weekends or really short trips, consider just staying in your usual time zone rather than shifting your body about. And again, trick your circadian rhythm into really making sure that it knows when it's daytime and nighttime. And I guess that can work the other way as well, in that, say you're trying to get your body to go to bed a lot earlier because your new time zone is going to be earlier. Then what you can do is, again, just make it dark, quiet, cold when your body's trying to go to sleep, to really tell your body, hello, it's nighttime. Okay, so then the nutrition. So these, as I said, these are some easy snippets that we can take, I guess, on holiday when we don't have 100% control over what's going on. So firstly, avoid high-fat snacks like chocolate. So the reason why we say high-fat is because high-fat, it doesn't matter what it is, actually, even like things like nuts and seeds as well, which are really high-fat, but good fats, and they have the ability to trigger what we call the gastrocolic reflex, which is a natural reflex in our gut that can make things move along a lot quicker, can also trigger pain as well. So this is not in everybody. People do have their own tolerance, but typically on holiday, unfortunately, we do tend, not unfortunately, but we're on holiday, we think, oh, if we're on holiday, we can eat what we want. And, for other people, the worst thing is they're going to put on some weight, which is obviously not ideal. But for IBS, not only will we put on weight because we don't have malabsorption, but actually this could trigger some symptoms. So it's just about being mindful and perhaps doing things like, if you have dessert, for example, share the dessert with somebody perhaps, or don't have the dessert every night. Or the snacks themselves like chocolate, ice cream, to consider going for things like sorbet instead. So just small changes again can make a huge difference. Take an empty reusable water bottle. So most airports and most places in the world now do have a lot of easily sourced drinkable water, and you'd be really surprised. And that habit that a lot of people have got into can then be transferred to being out and about, rather than thinking, I need to buy water all the time, or be in a restaurant to drink when you're out and about as a tourist. If you can take an empty has to be reusable water, you can even fill it up in the actual airport and things like that. So huge difference in terms of hydration. Take high fiber, low FODMAP snacks with you. So things like vegetable sticks, seeds, fruits. I was going to say nuts, but probably not on the flight because of people with a nut allergy as well. There's other low FODMAP brands as well that we can take snacks with as well. But I don't expect anybody to survive off snacks, because that's ridiculous. But it is if you're in that place where you maybe need to look a bit longer for something that you can eat in terms of meals, I've been there, you're starving hungry, or you're really tempted to eat something that you know is going to trigger you, but actually if you wait 30 minutes, you can get something a bit more, friendly to your gut. Having a snack in your bag or just to hand is a game changer. It really is. So don't be afraid to take things with you as well where possible. And if you plan ahead, it really makes a difference with all of these things. So not just the actual leading up to, thinking about the meditation, the changes that you need to make to sort of counterbalance your gut, but also, what are you going to take? What are you going to wear? These kinds of things. Just consider, even have a brain dump on a page, what you need to do, if anything, depending on where you are with your IBS. Okay, the other thing I was going to say is consider self-catering. So many people on holiday, the last thing you want to do is cook all the time and clean and all of this. However, if you are self-catering, it means that, you can make some of your meals. You've got the option. So you don't need to be sitting in, while everybody else enjoys, or expecting your family or who you're with to just sit in self-catering and enjoy home-cooked meals. You can eat out, of course, if there's, depending on your tolerance. But maybe if you're going for a flare, or maybe with anxiety levels, maybe something like be having the option to have maybe 1 meal out a day rather than 3 would really make a difference. Or at least having your breakfast at home, having a nice high fiber, a low FODMAP option, again, could make a huge difference. So it doesn't have to mean that you are actually eating all your meals at home, but it could make a little bit of a difference for you. Book the right meal on your flight. So what a lot of people don't realize, and this will really depend on the airlines, there is different options, but also depends on if you get a meal option or not, depends on how far you're going. But if you do, make sure that you're checking in more than 24 hours before, because if you check in later than that, there's no option to actually book a meal specifically. You'll just be given the general one. And there is quite a few varieties to have. So I would say to you, there's no low FODMAP option, unfortunately, but all major airlines that I've flown with, they have gluten-free. So I know that gluten is not a trigger in IBS, it's actually the fructose, so some FODMAPs in the gluten, but actually what you'll find is that think about FODMAPs, we don't necessarily need to get rid of all of them, but if we can just get rid of even a certain percentage, that can really help with symptom control. So if you opt for gluten-free, we know it's not going to have any wheat, barley or rye, which could be potentially big triggers for somebody with IBS. So an easy option then is to go gluten-free, don't have some of the triggers, you'll have some others, but it won't be as many. And the other option is a bland, but I've only seen that on Emirates Airlines, so I'm not sure if it's elsewhere. Maybe you guys can tell me in the Q&A in a little while. But definitely the bland is an option because it contains less spices, less garlic, onion, these things that potentially could again trigger our guts off. So it's not gluten-free, but it's just a bit more blander, but potentially safer. So definitely look at those, because I think a lot of people are not aware that it's actually, available to them. So definitely check those out. Take safe travel food. So we've gone through some of the snacks. Okay, so there may be times where you find yourself with limited options, or your gut is already very sensitive. So taking safe options gives you a backup. So we've gone through some of the snacks already and kind of touched on this. But I would say as well, if you are maybe going somewhere where it is self-catering, maybe in the same country, if there's even like safe ready meals that you can take, again, the ready meal options nowadays are so, are really, really broad. There might be even low FODMAP options. Why not take some to keep in the fridge or the freezer? Again, doesn't mean that you have to have them, but in those times where you're maybe in a flare up or you're feeling really anxious about not having any control, it could be an option. Eating out on holiday. So eating out on holiday is a huge one, and probably the one that is the thing that gets most anxiety driven, really. So eating out in general can be stressful, to be honest, and with IBS, it can be really stressful, never mind on holiday, where we're supposed to be having a good time, other people were relying on us. So if you have done the FODMAP process and know your triggers, then consider getting this translated. So I know there's options for this online. Have a little look wherever you're going. So if you're going to France, Italy, Middle East, wherever you're going, consider getting this translated into the local language. Because what you might find is some tourist destinations, people's English is very good, for example, but actually they don't they know the sort of, the kind of common English phrases that someone would ask them or say, but they don't know enough to really understand maybe an explanation of FODMAPs. So if you can get that translated and say, look, I can't have garlic or onion in this, that might be something that really pays dividends throughout your holiday. However, if there's lots of things, then life can be a little bit more difficult, because it's unlikely, if you're planning to do a full FODMAP-free diet on holiday, that's very unlikely to happen, that they're not going to have any onion, garlic, wheat, all these beans, pulses. There's quite a few things there that typical food, especially in a restaurant where they like to stuff it full of onion and garlic, it's probably not going to be possible with that. Okay. The other option is you can opt for things like gluten-free in places where the food is limited, and they're unlikely to cater for multiple restrictions. So this is a good one. Again, it's not perfect. It still means you're going to eat FODMAPs. However, it's reducing the FODMAP load. So it's reducing the amount of FODMAPs, and gluten-free seems to be a much more understood terminology than actually FODMAPs, because it's been around for a lot longer. There's actually some quite good research on a gluten-free diet in IBS to show that people had a really similar outcome as doing the low FODMAP diet, not because of the gluten, but because of just the wheat reduction. So these fructans, they're reducing down. So actually you might find just by avoiding gluten on holiday, that you have a really good symptom relief. So something to really consider with that. Avoid sauces. Sounds strange that I picked this out, but sauces tend to be the bit that adds flavor to the food. So ask them, can you put the sauce on the side? What's in the sauce? Really consider the sauce on this, because this often is containing a lot of garlic, a lot of onion. This is often where we get the flavor is. Of course, you can use FODZYME as well, which will break down any kind of fructans, any kind of lactose or fructase as well, and GOS, so various different FODMAPs in beans and pulses, in your wheat products, in your dairy, and also in some of the fruit sugars as well. So a really good thing to maybe consider taking with you. And again, it gives you more options rather than having to sit and eat nothing, gluten-free bread roll, and that's it. Okay. Do your research ahead of time where possible. So see if, sometimes even looking on some of the travel websites, you can get reviews. Unlikely from my experience to see anything about FODMAP specifically, but if you type in like, excuse me, things like gluten-free, often someone with celiac disease has been there. So it just starts to give you an indication of whether they really understand food and food intolerances. Sometimes this kind of thing. Look at the menu as well. So definitely in a lot of European cuisine, the food ingredients quite basic, quite simple, fresh, this kind of thing, and they're very easily adaptable. So they're very unlikely to have a whole FODMAP-free menu, but what you might find is actually when you look at the meals, they're quite simple. They're vegetables, some meat, some fries, and that's quite easily adaptable to a reduced FODMAP intake. And that might be a better option than, say, going to an Asian restaurant, which relies heavily on that onion and garlic for them. They just wouldn't taste the same without it. Okay. IBS travel toolkit as such. So first of all, psyllium husk, this is what I would take. So psyllium husk is a type of fiber, and it's good for both loose stools and constipation, which is I think a lot of people with loose stools, they hate the idea of fiber. They think, oh, it's going to make things worse. But actually what it does is bulk up the stool. So it actually slows down the stool for people who've got looser stools. And you can have around 2 sachets per day. What I would suggest with this is this should be in anyone's toolkit anyway. It's just honestly my favorite supplement, which is very boring because it's very basic, but it works. It's really good. The branded name is called Fibergel. And what you can do, because we know constipation is probably going to hit on the holiday, is actually have 2 sachets per day. This is not a laxative going to send you running to the toilet. But what you could do is have 1 sachet on the plane. So you're topping up your fiber essentially when you actually should have been having a nice meal with lots of fiber in it. And then definitely 2 the next day. It's not going to cause you to have loose stools. So that's a really good option to take. FODZYME. So FODZYME, again, we've already mentioned, it breaks down FODMAPs for us. So that can be, again, another good tool. I'm always transparent with these things. It doesn't mean you have to use it for every single meal, but it's nice to have the option, or those times where you're not really sure what's actually in your food. It's a nice option to have, in your bag, and you can just go quite subtly, just add it to the food, and then that that's been dealt with for you. Peppermint oil capsules. So these are quite good for pain blocking. So the peppermint in them is the active ingredient, or menthol is the active ingredient, and it literally blocks the pain signaling. So Interestingly, whenever I ask people how they take this, they generally take it when they get symptoms. But actually, when you look at the research, it shows that you should be taking it around half an hour before a meal. So, and they take it quite regularly, around 3 times a day. So what I would say to you, if you're someone who suffers with pain from IBS, consider actually using this on a regular basis rather than once you get the symptoms. Try using it like preemptively. And a hot water bottle, super, old school, but a hot water bottle is using very old school medicine in terms of heat will help relax muscles. And when you're feeling that pain in IBS, it's muscles cramping up. So if you can get them to relax, this will really, really help, especially at that time of the month. But a hot water bottle, it packs flat, it's nice in the suitcase, and it can be a really good option just for if you do get the cramps. Medications. So these are medications. If you do have any health problems, I always have to say check with your doctor, but these are over-the-counter medications. They do not require a prescription. If you're not sure, you can ask your doctor, or you can actually ask a pharmacist as well. Pharmacists actually know a lot more about medications than a doctor would do. But there's 2 types I would consider having with you. Not that you definitely need them, but actually it's just an in case. Why not have it rather than trying to translate that in a different language? So the first one is laxatives. There's 2, the Senna or Movicol, there's thousands of laxatives. Take with consistency is what I'd say with laxatives. So often I find clients will be very cautious about taking medication and laxatives because they have this fear that they're going to run to the toilet quickly. A lot of these laxatives take hours, like 13 hours to work, 7 hours to work, quite a long time. So typically I'd say start with it in the evening time, the idea being that in the morning you wake up and actually be able to go to the toilet. And then on each packet, it will give you the amount to start with and then how you can titrate it up. So start with the smallest dose. So if it doesn't work, the next day increase it up, the next day increase it up. But as soon as you do have a bowel motion, do not just come straight off it. Because what we find is people just yo-yo between constipation and having a bowel motion. So stay with it. And then if you still get slightly loose, remember, you're not going to end up running to the toilet. That's when you can slowly, over a few days, reduce it back down again. Okay, so you're really managing that rather than just like snap, I'm going to take a big dose of this, try and go to the toilet, have loose stools, and go constipated again. You're slowly increasing it, slowly reducing it down. You're in control. The other one is anti-diarrhea medication. I actually hate this medication because definitely it's got a place, but in IBS, it should be rarely used. And unfortunately, I think understandably, we do obviously fear having stool leakage or times where we can't control our bowels. And often we'll, use Imodium and use the full dose or just keep take it before we even need it sometimes. You think, I'll take a few of these I see before people even get on an aeroplane. And what I can say is do not do that because they were more likely to cause constipation. So people will get constipated and then not take them. Get constipated and become really uncomfortable. And the other thing this can happen over time is it can cause pelvic floor issues. So if you think about it, if every time you actually need to open your bowels, you are taking loperamide to stop that, then it's overriding the signaling around the muscles around your bowels. So over time, it can cause some issues with that. So I guess there's a place for it, but I would just say take with a lot of caution and read the instructions. And they usually say once you've had a loose stool, then you take it. So very, very cautionary with that. So just as a summary, I'm just going to check time. Good timing actually. As a summary, traveling through can throw up multiple barriers to having good gut health. In someone with IBS, this will result in symptoms, unfortunately, but you can put many science-backed methods into travel plan to help overcome barriers and avoid IBS symptoms. So it's just to really say, yes, we know our guts are more sensitive, but that doesn't mean you're just going to have to be like, oh, well, I've got IBS, whenever I travel, of course I'm going to get, no, that's not it. We just need to put up some little extra things into our routine to really get what we need, out of our travel. Okay. So is there any questions at all based on that?
Thank you so much, Kirsten. That was fantastic. We do have a few questions here. I'm actually going to start by sharing this comment from Donna saying that she received a bland meal on Air France. So everyone can be aware of that. Great. Thank you so much for that input. Our next question comes from Mike asking Kirsten, how do you use FODZYME? Do you recommend it to your patients?
Yeah, so good question. So FODZYME it breaks down various different FODMAPs. So it breaks down GOS, which is galacto-oligosaccharides, and beans and pulses. It actually breaks down lactose as well, so the sugar found in a lot of the dairy products that we have. It breaks down fructose, so things like your onion and your garlic as well. So what's great about it is that it's got various different enzymes in it, whereas other products would just maybe be one type of enzyme, which is good if you only have that one, issue. And then also what's particularly good about it is it's a powder format, so it mixes with the food, which we know is really important, because if the enzyme doesn't come into contact with actually the food, then it's not going to work. So in the case of, maybe I've seen a lot of the lactase capsules that we can get online. And yes, all lactase is lactase at the end of the day, but they're in capsules. So actually how much of that is going to break down and mix with your food. So some of them will work anyway, but with the powder, it's going to be more effective in theory with that. So I think it's a great kind of option for that. So a lot of my clients will use it. I like to be less restrictive with the diets long term. So I don't like to use the product in terms of, eat what you want, and you can just use this, and we won't bother finding your intolerances. But where my clients try to use it is in two ways. So either they'll have like a stack of it and they go on holiday and they use it for those times where they're not really sure what is in this food, and they're like, I don't really want to chance that, I'll use that. Or the other time is if they are unfortunately someone who has multiple food intolerances with the FODMAP diet, which is quite rare by the time we go through all those other factors. But actually, if they were to be following all these different restrictions, then the diet would be really, really restrictive. So it's easier then to use an enzyme to break those foods down for them. So typically that tends to be people on a more vegan diet, where actually when you think about if they were to get all their nutrition right from that plant-based diet, then there's a lot of FODMAPs in there. So it's actually quite difficult for some people, not everybody, to get it to a low enough level for that. I hope that answers the question, Mike.
Yes, thank you, Kirsten. And I do just want to share with everyone, as Kirsten mentioned, we can reduce the overall FODMAP load of a meal that contains multiple FODMAPs. So that's how we can kind of address those. We do have a similar question to that, saying, I'm curious about how do you use FODZYME when you don't know what's in your meal? And so I think Kirsten kind of addressed that just now, but one thing I would also emphasize or highlight is that when you are traveling and thinking of using FODZYME, definitely take the time leading up to your trip to, practice a little bit, test it out, get to the right dose, and understand how FODZYME can help you, so that you're not having your first trial when you are, dining out at your first night on vacation. So one more little tip there. We have plenty of questions, so this is great to see. Kirsten, would you have any advice on what can you do if traveling on public transport, like a public bus or a long bus? Any kind of advice on how to manage potential situations like that?
Yeah, so there's so many things that we can do. I think definitely lead in up to it. So don't just think about on the bus, what am I going to do? I think you really need to, as I said in the presentation tonight, you need to be considering that a week, 2 weeks in advance, leading up to that, to reduce all these, triggers for your gut, taking the right food with you. And then really I would try and keep into your normal routine. So look at the bus schedule, and if there is anything like going in the day, rather than something that you maybe, even if you save a bit of money on it, maybe going earlier in the day or later overnight, try to avoid those times, because that will disrupt your schedule more, and it will make it more likely that you're actually going to disrupt going to the toilet, opening your bowels. And then in terms of the toilet use, find out from the bus company, because I know definitely in the UK, the coaches and things, they have a toilet on board. So find out if that's available. And also if it's a particularly long trip, because I know in the US, they do really long, is it Greyhound? They have like really long trips across. There should be stops along the way, and they will be very much regulated, monitored. So find out how often they are, just to give you some sort of peace of mind with that. And then even on top of that, consider CBT again, because if it's something you're having to do regularly, or if it's a really important trip, actually, if you feel really anxious about it, regardless of what you do, if you're really, really anxious about this, and I can completely understand it, then that alone, that anxiety could trigger a symptom. So consider really getting some CBT to help with that.
Thank you, really helpful. Here we have another question. Is it good to fast during travel?
No. So fasting is a question I get asked about all the time, but the research shows irregular eating worsens IBS. Now, initially when people fast, they actually feel better most of the time it's because there's nothing in their gut. So it's not because your IBS has got better, but they initially feel better. But actually it can cause a lot of issues with bloating, constipation, pain, because you're just not putting anything in your gut, you're not feeding it. So that can cause multiple issues regardless of what type of IBS you have. So no, please avoid that.
Thank you. Here we have a few questions around the theme of psyllium husk, and a little bit of a question repeating the general advice. And then here we have another saying, I thought that psyllium husk was not good for IBS-C because it can bulk up your BM more. So if we could maybe expand on the question around psyllium husk, that seems like it'd be helpful.
Yes, good, because I feel like there's a lot of things out there. Psyllium husk is like, it almost comes across as really boring and basic, but it honestly, it is significantly changes things. So no, it doesn't bulk it up enough to cause issues with IBS-C. So what does though is some of the some of the types of fibers, they have a really high viscosity, so they actually draw in lots and lots and lots of water with that, and they would actually potentially, depending on the type, but only in extreme cases, slow things down, bulk it up too much. So chia seeds is particularly bad for this. So I don't know if anyone see that chia seed cleanse or whatever trend it was on TikTok. For a lot of people, yes, you get enough fiber, but actually it could really slow your gut down and cause a lot of issues, especially for people with IBS-C, constipation dominant one, where psyllium husk doesn't seem to have this effect. And so the amount that we generally recommend is around 7 to 10 grams per day. Of course, always start with that small amount, so maybe a tablespoon, maybe 3 grams, depending on if you're taking a sachet or you're just buying the normal, and have that for a couple of days and then increase it just to see and get your confidence up with it. But it's good for all forms of IBS, and I've been using it for like 11 years and multiple studies on it. It's in the IBS guidelines and the BDA. It's pretty extensive. Yeah,
great, thank you, that clarifies a lot, really helpful.
Good.
We have another question here saying, my dietitian told me not to drink peppermint tea. What would the difference be between taking a peppermint capsule and drinking peppermint tea?
So I don't know why your dietitian has told you that. There's nothing wrong with peppermint tea for IBS. It doesn't help IBS. So a lot of people mistakenly think, oh, peppermint tea is good for IBS because peppermint helps. Now, peppermint capsules are really concentrated, whereas peppermint tea is just a washing of peppermint. So it's not that it doesn't help, but we have no research around peppermint tea. So it helps for overall hydration, but it's not going to help specific symptoms like a capsule will. The only difference is if you were having symptoms of acid reflux, because peppermint tea can, or mints or anything that can worsen acid reflux, but that's not a symptom in IBS. But that's my only thinking, why have they said that? Now, even with that, what you'll find is peppermint oil capsules are what we call an enteric coat. So they've got a special coating in them, which means that they don't actually open up in your stomach. They open up that further down your gut, which is where they're supposed to activate and help your symptoms. So they shouldn't worsen acid reflux. So that's my only, I don't know the full story, but just in case there's an acid problem, the peppermint oil capsules actually open up further down your gut, but you can't chew them. You have to swallow them whole.
Thank you so much. I think that touches on this next question we had around potential contraindications with GERD and peppermint oil. And so the question is, can you still use the peppermint oil capsule? Been told peppermint relaxes the valve between your stomach and esophagus and makes the GERD worse. So if there's anything else you want to elaborate on that.
Yeah, so I've not heard about it relaxing the muscles. It's definitely a pain blocker, but as I said, it's got an enteric coat on it, so it doesn't open up in the stomach. That's what that enteric coat is designed for, not to open up in that pH level. So it should be fine. But again, try it. I've not had any adverse reactions with my clients who've got GERD.
Wonderful. And then we have here a comment and question from Tracy. Thank you for this masterclass and information. You're welcome, Tracy, and thank you, Kirsten, for being here. Our question is, how is FODZYME different than Beano? Because I'm so thrilled to have this option and cannot wait to get some. I can actually address this as well. So the difference between FODZYME and BINO is there's kind of two things to consider. One is ours is a digestive enzyme blend. So we are targeting that GOS group that a BINO would target, but we also target the fructans in the wheat, garlic, onion, all those kind of fruits and vegetables and whole grains. And then we also target the lactose. So the kind of best way to decide if FODZYME or BINO are your best options is to think about what triggers there are for you. And so if beans or legumes are really just what you're sensitive to, then BINO is probably a better option. The other difference in terms of our products is that ours is a powder form, whereas BINO is a capsule. And so as Kirsten mentioned, really making sure that the digestive enzymes are able to homogenize with whatever FODMAPs they're targeting is important. So if it turns out that, all you really need is a BINO to address a GOS intolerance, we also recommend sprinkling the BINO on the food as well to make sure that the homogenization is happening.
Yeah. And I would also add BINO is actually contained polyols, so that if you were sensitive to mannitol, then you would need to avoid it.
Yes, thank you. And then here we have another question. I already take prescription enzymes whenever I eat, aka Creon. How is FODZYME different, and who should I ask about taking both? So this is also a complex question, but one we do actually hear quite often. And so Creon, of course, are prescription enzymes, and they're really meant to kind of address a clinical deficiency. And so, the body naturally produces many enzymes. For some people, that's not working properly. And so Creon can kind of supplement that. FODZYME is actually targeting FODMAPs with an enzyme that the body does not naturally produce apart from lactase. So that's the main difference. There's little to indicate that there's any risk of taking both at the same time. The way that the Creon enzymes are really meant to work is by kind of creating what the body would naturally be creating from a digestive standpoint. And so FODZYME is designed to work within that natural ecosystem. So we don't have any indications that they would be less effective or there would be any risk associated with both. Here we have a question: any tips for tent camping?
Tent camping, oh, that's a niche one. Yeah, so I actually weirdly had a client who did this last summer, tent camping, and we're kind of working towards it. So tent camping, it depends on a few things, like what are your facilities, who you're going with, and all of that. But in theory, for traditional tent camping, in my head, I'm thinking you should have quite a lot of control over the food that you're taking. So it would be about making the food itself shouldn't be an issue, would be my thing. And if you're outside, then your activity, the movement side of things should be pretty good as well. Where you're probably going to get some issues is maybe around the mental health side, because with camping, if we are in close proximity even to loved ones for a long time, then it can be a bit more stressful. The sleep can be out as well. So it should be around mental health, and sleep would be the two huge ones. Again, that build up that 1 or 2 weeks before, we really need to plan in. But when you're there, what I would suggest, a couple of things. So number one, consider having some you time, which sounds a bit strange, but often when we are camping or even on holiday in general, to be honest, we're spending quite intensive time with people. And I said, it could be loved ones as well. We love them, but we don't want to spend every waking moment with them. So I would schedule in even 45 minutes, half an hour on your own, even to go for a walk or just go into the tent on your own and just read a book, just to be alone and just kind of just dampen things down a little bit. And then also for sleep. So if you didn't get a particularly good night's sleep, we know actually if you sleep in another bed from your usual sleep, this can be an issue. Then go and have a nap in the day, rather than thinking you need to be on the go, active continually. So there would be the two ones. And I guess the last one that I just thought about would be the toilet issue. So toilets are not always there. It depends on where you're camping. So if it's an actual camping site, there will be shared toilets. And with that kind of thing, you can't really schedule when you're going to go for a poo, unfortunately. You need to let it happen naturally. But if you're worried about using public toilets, consider getting some of the, I don't know if anyone see it, it's called poo puree, which is like a toilet spray. So people don't smell things, which, we shouldn't care about. We all go for a poo, let's be honest, but it's one of those things we can feel anxious about using the public toilet. But basically you spray it into the toilet bowl before you go, and it does really work. It really covers up the smell a little bit, and there's lots and lots of brands out there now. So that's just one example. It's like the well-known one, but there's so many brands out there. So there's a few tips there. But really, camping, I guess it can vary so much. So just go back to those 4 principles: sleep, the movement, the nutrition, mental health, and just consider in your scenario what is not you're not able to do away with, what's lacking, and that will be the thing that you need to create a little plan of action around.
Great, thank you. And here I'm going to answer what will be our last question. And the question is there a limit to the number of doses one can have in a single meal? And with that, we would say no, but what we recommend is first starting with the standard FODZYME dose to see if it helps you and, addresses some of the FODMAP sensitivities you might be having troubles with. We also recommend then, if it's not fully helping, you can go up to a second dose to see if that's going to have an impact. But beyond that, we wouldn't recommend continuing to add doses of FODZYME, because at that point, it's probably something else that's driving the symptoms. And there's probably a better tool out there to help what you're experiencing. So there's little risk to having FODZYME when there isn't a FODMAP to target. Digestive enzymes are simply proteins. Our formula really has very little in it apart from the proteins. And then we also have just a little bit of dextrin, which is just to stabilize the enzyme. So if there's not a FODMAP for it to be addressing, or you take more than you think maybe your body needs, those digestive enzymes get metabolized and excreted like any other food would be. They don't kind of circulate or remain in the body. But of course, if they're not helping, we don't want you to be taking them. So it's always a little bit of a learning process, but it is very low risk if there is something that doesn't have a full dose of FODMAPs for FODZYME to be addressing. With that, I want to really thank you all for joining us today. I want to thank you, Kirsten, for sharing these fantastic insights and advice.
Great. Thank you for having me.